So lesson 94 is about writing fractions and decimals as percents, which you might be thinking we've already learned that, which we have. But we learned one method, and today we're going to look at a different method that is a little bit more universally applicable. So let's look at the one that we have learned so far. So far we've seen something like this, where if we wanted to turn 3/5 into a percent, we would make our denominator become 100. Why do we do that? Because total in percentages is always 100. If I said every single person watching this video right now is gonna get an A, that would mean 100% of the people watching this video right now are gonna get an A. That's not what I'm saying, but you get my point. So anyway, then we would look at, okay, how do I get from 5 to 100? So to get from 5 to 100, I know that that means to multiply by 20, because 5 times 20 equals 100. So if I'm multiplying by 20 down here, remember we have to keep things balanced. So that means I also have to multiply by 20 up top. So 3 times 20 would give me 60. So 60 out of 100 means that I would have 60%, meaning 3/5 is equivalent to 60%. So far that is what you guys have learned in terms of turning a fraction into a decimal. That's the method that you know so far. Same with decimals. So we've looked at decimals like 4/10, turning that into a fraction, we've said, or into a percent, I'm sorry, we would go via a fraction first, because we could read this as 4/10, or we could add on a 0, which doesn't change the value, right? We would read this as 40 hundredths, which we could write as 40 hundredths, which looks a lot like what we had up here, right? We've got that denominator of 100 now. So therefore, if it's out of 100, we know that we can just write the numerator as the percent. So 4/10 is the same as 40%. Those are the methods that we've looked at so far. So now today we're going to learn a new method in which we multiply any fraction or decimal times 100% in order to make it into a percent. Okay, so anytime you want to turn a decimal or a fraction into a percent, you can always multiply by 100%. Okay, so we're going to look at what that looks like, and we're going to look at why we would need this other method, because it seems pretty simple to do it the way that we already looked at, right? So take, for example, 3/5 to 100. This was easy, and it was something that we could do reasonably, because we know that 5 times 20 equals 100. What happens when we have a fraction like 1/6, for example, and we want to then turn that one into a decimal of 100? Well, do we have a whole number that we know of that multiplies by 6 to give us 100? We don't, and there actually isn't one. So because there's not a whole number that multiplies by 6 to give us 100, that makes this a little bit messy. So that's why we're gonna look at a different method here, because that way we don't have to do all the work to figure this part out. Gives us something, the method that we're using where we multiply by 100% gives us something that's gonna work across the board, whether it's this type of fraction or this type of fraction. So let's kind of look at an example and see what we can do with that. So if we've got, let me go ahead and switch to the next one. If we've got 1/3, for example, and we're wanting to turn that into a percent, we would multiply by 100%. Now, 100% is not a fraction, but remember, I can turn any whole number into a fraction by putting it over 1, okay? And here's where you say, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but here's where I say, can we do anything to this before we multiply? And here's where you would normally say, cross simplify. And I would say, yay, good job. But we can't, because 103 don't have any common factors. So we checked for it, we can't do it, so we move on to multiplying. So we're going to multiply straight across. 1 times 100 gives us 100. 3 times 1 gives us 3. Now, we still need to simplify this. So we would simplify this by dividing, because that's what this bar means, right? This bar tells us to divide. Okay, so we're gonna divide 100 by 3 and work that whole thing out. So 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. I always go through this part a little fast because you guys know how to divide. So if you get stuck here though, please rewind and watch it again. 1, then bring down the 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, so we're gonna have 1 left over. Remember, your remainder is always your numerator. Your divisor is always your denominator. So my answer is gonna be 33 1/3. Okay, all right, so let's look at with a percent, that would be a fraction, sorry. Let's look at what we would do with a percent, how we would multiply that times 100. So if we've got 1.2 and we want to turn that decimal into a percent, we're going to multiply that times 100%. So now this is where I would normally say, what does multiplying by 100 do to a decimal? And somebody in class would say, it moves the decimal place 2 spots to the right. And I would say, you're right, good job. I know I'm gonna keep doing this, I'm sorry, I really miss you guys. So that would cause this to bump the decimal from where it is right now. We're gonna bump it 2 spaces to the right. That's what multiplying by 100 does anytime you have a decimal, okay? It always does that. If you're not sure why or you want more proof, you can always set it up and do 100 times 1.2. 2 times 0 is 0, 2 times 0 is 0, 2 times 1 is 2. Then we're gonna plug in our filler 0, 1 times 0 is 0, 1 times 0 is 0, 1 times 1, 1. Then we add it all up, 0, 0, 2, 1. We count 1 behind the decimal, so we bump it in, and that gives us 120. So now let's go back up here and see if that's what we would get just by bumping our decimal. We took our decimal and we bumped it over. We have to fill in a 0 to any blank spaces. So our new answer is in fact 120. And we are in percentages now, so that would be 120%. So again, the goal here, what we're doing is converting into percents by multiplying by 100%. This works for decimals, it works for fractions. So let's try another example. You guys are doing great. Hang in there. All right, so now we're gonna look at a mixed number. Okay, so the book actually gives you 2 different methods here. I am gonna teach you one, and I'm gonna stick with that one. However, if you would like to read the other method and try it out, you are more than welcome to. I'm sticking with the second method for a few reasons. Number one, because it's gonna be a lot more universally applicable. I think I've used that word already once today, but it's the same thing. So we're gonna be able to use it no matter what in any problem. The first method that they offer only works sometimes. So I would much rather give you a method that's gonna work all the time. And this method also lines up with what we've already been doing with mixed numbers. So that way, what you've already been learning about when we do operations with mixed numbers is still the same thing as what we're gonna talk about today. And that would be, if somebody was in class, I could ask you, what would that be? What do we normally do with a mixed number before we multiply? And you would say, we turn it into an improper fraction, and you would be right. So let's look at that. So to turn it into an improper fraction, remember we have to multiply, add, and keep the denominator, okay? So we're gonna multiply 4 times 2, which is 8, and then we're gonna add that numerator, which is 9. That becomes our new numerator. Now, your denominator stays the same, so we keep that 4 on the bottom, okay? Now we've got a fraction, just like what we used in the very first example I did. So we can take that fraction times 100%. Remember, we said 100 is not a fraction, but if we wanted it to be one, all we gotta do is put it over 1. Now this is where I would say, what do we do before we multiply? And you would say cross simplify. So we look at it and we say 9 and 1, no common factors there, nothing to simplify. 4 and 100, that we can do because we know that both of those can be divided by 4. 4 divided by 4 leaves us with 1. 100 divided by 4 leaves us with 25. Now we can multiply straight across the top straight across the bottom. 9 times 25, if you weren't sure what that was, you could come over here to the side and set it up. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 2, 18, plus 4 is 225. So that would be 225 over 1. And we're in percentages now. 225 divided by 1 is still just 225%. Okay? Let's look at one more example. You guys are doing great. We are almost done with this lesson. So last example is a word problem. So we're going to look at the word problem and how we set that up. So the word problem says 20 of the 30 people on the bus were reading. What percent of people on the bus were reading? So let's kind of break that down. 20 of the 30 people on the bus were reading. We want to know what percent of people on the bus were reading. So we could just take our fraction and we want to turn it into a percent. Now, if you can reduce your fraction before you turn it into a percent, I would advise that you do that. That's going to make your answer, make it a lot simpler to get your answer. So we know that both 20 and 30 can divide evenly by 10. So let's do that. That would make this a 2, and that would make this a 3. So now we have the fraction 2/3. So now we're going to be multiplying that fraction times 100%, because again, our goal is to turn the fraction into a percent. So we'll multiply by 100. We don't have a denominator, so we can always put a denominator of 1. Now we look to see if we can cross simplify. Nothing here, so we're just going to go straight across, straight across. 100 times 2 is 200. 3 times 1 is 3. So then remember we said this bar right here means to divide. So we'll set that up. 200 divided by 3. 3 goes into 20 6 times. 6 times 3 is 18. 20 minus 18 is 2. Bring down your 0. 3 goes into 20 6 times again. 6 times 3, 18. 20 minus 18 is 2. So we've got our remainder here. Remember, we said that's the numerator. This guy out here, he's the denominator. So then we just make that into our fraction part of our mixed number. And your answer then would be 66 2/3%. And that is lesson 94. So to sum it all up, the main thing I want you to take away from this lesson is that anytime you're trying to turn a fraction or a decimal into a percent, you can always multiply by 100%. Now go do your homework. Reminder, this is 94, so you just need to do the even number problems for homework. All right, see you guys on the next lesson.